Good afternoon and good morning to all of you, and thanks for joining today's Retalk virtual session, Retalk 100% Renewables, reaching the age of boom in Asia, corporate's perspective on renewable sourcing. My name is Zoe Zhu, project producer of Leader Associates, and your host of today's talk. To start things off, I'd like to briefly introduce who we are at Leader Associates, our work for 100% renewables, and most importantly, an overview of today's agenda and speakers. Leader Associates is a global leading event organizer in the field of clean energy. You can also see our strong record and partnership across 5 continents from the site. To date, we are very honored to have a network of over 18,000 industry professionals covering solar, wind, and energy storage. 5 months from now on, we'll also be hosting our 100% Renewable Summit 2020 event, physically in Manila of the Philippines, aiming to bring renewable energy buyers and suppliers together to meet and discuss the growth of renewable energy sourcing in the corporate and public sector. So please feel free to reach out if you are interested. Additionally, I'm delighted to announce our next virtual session, Solar Vietnam Virtual 2020 event, will be on air on August 11 at your desk. Solar Vietnam Virtual is the only and the first virtual event targeting Vietnam C&I rooftop solar and the 1 gigawatt IPPA program just announced. Having industrial consumers like Adidas, Puma, and H&M, as well as industry parks like DeepSea and VSIP, has confirmed to join as well. And basically, that's everything about us. Now, a brief overview of our distinguished speakers today from Kajimura-san, Deputy Head of Power Business Division in SB Energy, one of the largest IPP in Japan under SoftBank Group. Strong in leasing model while also exploring the corporate PPA sector. The second presenter will be Mr. Massimiliano, Head of Global Commercial Origination of Enel Green Power. And for your record, EGP is a renewable energy arm of Enel, the Italian national power company. Also is one of the largest energy sellers in the world. Next, Mr. Rasmus, Managing Director of ACT Renewables, also the Senior Manager of Lego Group, and Mr. Hu, Strategic Advisor of Hwaseung Group, also former Vice President of Renewables Global Operations. So we'll have a joint session today. ACT Renewables is a technical advisor representing Adidas and its local supplier in understanding and engaging in the Vietnam's 1 gigawatt DPP program. Hwaseung Group is made up of 7 subsidiary companies. It's also one of the largest manufacturing groups in Korea. Finally, I would like to give you some tips to better engage in today's webinar. During the presentation, your microphone will be muted to avoid background noises. For questions directed to presenters, there is an Q&A box at the bottom of your control panel. We will go through it at the end of each presentation. Also, I would encourage every one of you to send greetings in the chat box and establish a more interactive relation with one another. All the video recording and slides will be shared on Friday and will be posted on ASEAN Clean Energy Week website, as well as our social media channels at the same time. Without further ado, let's start with our first presenter, Mr. Kajimura-san from SB Energy. May you open the camera and share your screen to start the presentation? Hi, Mr. Kajimura-san.
Okay, hello?
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you. So I will open the presentation now.
Yes.
So can you see this?
Yes, we can see it.
Okay. So yeah, let me start. So thank you. Hello, everyone. Good afternoon. This is Isao Kajimura from, I'm a Deputy Head of Power Business Division, SB Energy Corp, Japan. This is the first time for me to make this kind of presentation, so I feel a bit nervous. so bear me if I make any mess, but I hope this presentation will be somewhat helpful to you. So today I'll talk about the corporate PPA, framework, opportunities, and obstacles. So let me introduce ST Energy first. We are energy arm of SoftBank Group, one of the largest renewable energy developers in Japan. Now we have developed more than 700 megawatts renewables in Japan, currently on all FIT basis. We are actively involved in development of onshore, offshore wind, and geothermal. So out of the nearly 800 megawatts, nearly 500 megawatts are in operation, and the rest is under development. And a majority of our portfolio is solar, but we have also some onshore wind and biomass. So overseas, we have onshore wind of 50 megawatts in Mongolia, and our sister company has developed and operated 2,000 megawatts of solar in India. We also have JV with a US leading company in fuel cell business called Bloom Energy Japan. And this provides the clients redundancy and enables uninterruptible operation. It is clean generation without combustion and suitable for off-grid and microgrid. Now I'll talk about the background of demand for green energy growing. As you can see in this graph, the top motivation for renewable electricity sourcing is management of GHG emissions. And second, corporate social responsibility, or maybe ESG. And the third driver is the economics of renewable energy, because renewable energy is becoming more and more cost competitive. And demand varies depending on the industry. So here you can see the left one, materials industry, which is comprises of mining, metals, paper and pulp, or chemicals. This is the biggest consumer of electricity and the biggest consumer of renewable electricity. Followed by IT, consumer, industrials, etc. And you can see the biggest percentage of renewable consumption is done by the financial sector, percentage-wise. Here I set out several approaches to source green energy. This is how RE100 companies procure green energy. And the second row shows the yellow highlighted part, shows the corporate PPA, as I call it. And this is now 22%. And when you look at the bottom, energy attribute certificate purchase is the majority of the procurement method. But I know that corporate PPA's percentage is growing year by year. So why a corporate PPA now? As I explained, ESG and the cheap power demand. Also, it helps the customers to hedge the operation cost by fixing their power price. And also compared with other approaches like certificate purchase, corporate PPA provides the client, provides you the clear additionality. And also the customers do not care about the operation and maintenance because it will be done by the developer. So, and for developers like us, corporate PPA is a new business opportunity after FIT or incentive mechanism falls away. And this shows the market of corporate PPA. As you can see, it is growing very rapidly, especially over the past few years. And mainly done in America, including US, Mexico, etc. And APAC is still a small portion and is mainly explained by Australia and India. So Southeast Asia and other parts of Asia, still the corporate PPA is in infant stage. And this shows the 4 approaches of corporate PPA, on-site and 3 off-site methods. I'll explain from the next slide. So on-site PPA, this is the very simple generator builds a plant on the on-site, mainly rooftop, and provides green power under corporate PPA and receives green tariff. And when you look at the right-hand side, electricity supplier or retailer fills the gap between the customer's consumption and renewable generation by firming contract. The next one is private wire PPA. How it is different from the first one is that here the renewable plant is located outside the site of the customer. But normally it is located close to or next to the site of the customer. And developer builds a private wire to connect to the customer site. And the next one is the physical PPA or SWIFT PPA. How it is different from the previous 2 is that this uses transmission and distribution network to transfer green energy. So here you can see the customer will have to pay the wheeling charge to the TSO, DSO. And also the renewable generator, depending on the market or depending on the country, has the obligation to balance. So there needs to be a balancing service to be procured by a provider. And the last one is synthetic PPA, financial PPA or virtual PPA. The difference from the previous 3 is that this approach is kind of financial, and actually the grids that renewable generator is located could be different from the customer's grid. So the energy does not actually flow through to the customer sometimes, but it still works. And also the settlement between the generator and the customer is only the difference between the pre-agreed strike price and the prevailing power price. So if the market power price is higher, then the renewable generator has to pay the difference to the customer. And if vice versa, customers pay the difference. So key issues of corporate PPA. Terms, depending on the countries. For example, Philippines, I know it is quite short, a few years. And Australia or India are 7 to 10 years. And the US, Europe, Singapore, Thailand, longer than that. For a customer, longer term will enable tariff reduction, but it loses flexibility to get away if the prevailing power price falls significantly. So there's some certain risk. For a generator, longer tenor will improve cash flow because they can get bigger debt size, and there is a chance of releveraging in the middle. But they have to need a renewal of certain equipment, so additional capex during the term. So the price issue is whether the corporate PPA price here is cheaper than the prevailing utility tariff? And if not, how much premium are the customers ready to pay? So for your reference, in Japan, some retailers or utility offer green premium tariff and supplying green energy. That is normally 2 to 5 yen higher per kilowatt hour higher than the normal tariff. Tariff design, as far as I know, there are 4 or maybe more types of tariff design. One is fixed tariff, then declining, CPI escalation, linked to the prevailing retail tariff. So linked to the prevailing retail tariff means that, for example, a 5% discount over the prevailing retail tariff. So volume profile shape, the generator needs to care about customers' minimum consumption versus maximum generation. If the customer's consumption is higher, for example, in a big factory, you don't have to worry. But if generation exceeds customer's minimum consumption, you have to think about how to deal with the residual energy, which was not off-taken by the customer. So the solution is either to export to the grid or use storage. And for customers, normally the contract is pay as produced. So there is a volume risk because it does not necessarily fit with the consumption profile. So in that case, the customer normally can enter a farming contract with a third party or manage its own load profile, kind of demand response. Off-taker credit is key for seller. Parent company guarantee or other credit support may be required. For SMEs, aggregation is one way to manage the credit issue. And in the future, maybe credit intermediaries like guaranteeing companies may emerge. In some countries, as far as I know, for example, in Taiwan, TSO backs up the offtake in case of termination due to the default of the buyer. And we are now exploring an opportunity to make C&I business, corporate PPA business in Japan. And we identify certain costs which were hidden in FIT scheme. One is a balancing cost to balance the grid demand and supply, and also transmission loss. These are not negligible costs, so you have to bear that in mind in developing business. So last one, the financing. Long tenor is key to be competitive for a developer like us. But according to my experience, over 10-year tenor is not so easy because the banks do not normally want to take the credit risk of the private company for more than 10 years. And EPC competitiveness is very important. But also you have to pay attention to the credit of the contractor to get construction financing. Then I'll move on to the opportunities and obstacles in Southeast Asia. I think Southeast Asia has a lot of opportunities because it has a lot of good industrial customers. So they are potentially a good customer of corporate PPA. And actually, the market seems to be starting from on-site or rooftop self-consumption. But from the perspective of customer, they have a choice of either procuring through the corporate PPA or invest themselves into a generation plant. So cash-rich customer might prefer self-investment. So that is a tricky point for a developer like us. And in Southeast Asia, as well as in other parts of the world, renewable generation cost is declining. So that is good. And after all, the cost competitiveness against grid power is a key factor to make this business to make a break. So there are several regulatory arrangements to be improved. One is, for example, the renewable energy targets would hopefully be put in place. And liberalizing direct contracting is expected. And also, especially on on-site, export residual power to the grid is sometimes critical. And also, development of power market will help develop this kind of business. And also, TSOs, DSOs expected to cooperate in terms of grid access. For example, by building a new network or connect and manage, we need grid access to make this business happen. And also, I know sometimes regional distribution companies do not really want to connect or tie in the renewable plant to their distribution network because they may potentially lose their sales, but their cooperation is very necessary. Also, Southeast Asia is different from the US and Europe in many aspects, so there could be different evolution, and especially local banks will need to be used to this kind of business. And as you can see in this chart, Southeast Asia has a lot of solar potential, and population is, quite big compared to other regions. But still, PV capacity is smaller than other solar countries or regions. So there is a much room to grow, I think. So lastly, I will tell you about the SB Energy's ambitions. We are now developing a C&I business in Japan, including rooftop and ground-mounted solar. And so we aim to leverage this experience in Japan to develop the similar business in other regions, particularly Asia Pacific. And we are looking for local partners to work with in Vietnam, Cambodia, Thailand, Taiwan, etc. And we can use our Japanese relationship to the potential customer and financing capability. And also, as SoftBank Group, will use our IoT capability to extract more value to the generation business. So this shows our strategy called Golden Triangle. What is the generation business, renewable generation business? And our strategy is to integrate this with BITS, which means IoT business, and also mobility business like EV or battery business. So as an example of using the IoT leverage to add more value to the generation, this is the example of Climacell, which is a startup that we invest. In essence, it is a technology to accurately forecast weather conditions. So this helps sophisticate the generation forecast of the each generation plant, renewable plant. So it can potentially reduce the balancing cost in the market. So this is the VPP, virtual power plant. We are participating in the pilot project in Japan. And as you may already know, we will aggregate several distributed power sources, like including solar or wind. And also we aggregate the customer side and control demand and supply of the power using IoT and battery. So this will create additional revenue stream to the renewable generation. So make this business more easily. Okay, so this is the end of my presentation. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. It's scheduled, and now I'm switching the slides to my end, also share with public. Okay, okay, so here we select some of the questions from pre-registration form. So you can, so now Mr. Kajimura-san, can you see that?
Yes, yes, I can see.
Okay, so maybe we can one by one.
Okay, one by one. So first questions, corporate PPA market in Japan. I think Japan is still quite difficult market because I think the good news is that we have more and more RE100 companies, and more and more companies are more and more conscious and interested in procuring green energy. So that is the advantage, but the difficult point is that in terms of legal framework, it is not yet permitted for the generator to sell directly the power to the customer. So we have to find another way to work around that, and there's some uncertainty about that. So that is one thing, and also competition is quite severe, especially in the B2B market, because the good customer credit with a good credit tends to get a good deal with the utility. So they sometimes get a big discount over the standard tariff. So the benefit of getting corporate PPA is sometimes quite marginal in terms of money, and maybe it is not really advantageous in terms of financial. So the corporate, or the customer tends to put more value in getting the green power side of things. So CSR, they have to value CSR. And the second question is that I think they did, as the solar or wind cost decline or reduce, the market will be taking up. So all three countries will be promising in the future. And especially Vietnam, I think they are putting in place the regulation or incentive to help support the corporate PPA or other kind of PPA. So that is, Vietnam is, I think, potentially a good market. And also Vietnam has a lot of industrial enterprises located. So in that respect also very good. And top three obstacles faced by Asian renewable energy generators. I think that the most important factor is that the cost comparison against the grid. So as the solar or wind price goes down, there will be more market. And also there needs to be some regulations to be adjusted, as I explained in the presentation. And also in on-site, especially export, the ability to export residual power to the grid, and also cooperation of local distribution companies are quite essential. And now it is not, sometimes it is not enough, so that could be an obstacle for now. So future prospects of VPP program and potential. I think, as I explained, we are doing the pilot project in Japan, and we hope to cooperate with local companies to introduce our expertise and experience in Japan to those countries. So, question 5. Yeah, I think that when the price advantage is growing, I think that the Japanese government will also try to accommodate that kind of new business. So I think they will try to adjust the regulation to cope with that changing environment. So I'm kind of optimistic about the Japanese market in the future. Okay.
Oh, okay. So, okay. So thanks so much for your kind sharing. And there are still some remaining questions in the Q&A box, because we know that SB Energy have very strict rule for medium. So we will only amend 2 questions here from our audience. Can you open the Q&A box?
Okay.
Okay.
Typical risk management strategies around C&I rooftop.
Okay, so the first question is from Oscar. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that maybe it is not really, there's not really a magic, but we need to assess the credit, and if necessary, we will ask for the parent company guarantee or other credit assurance. I think that is most important risk management, especially offtake credit risk.
Understood. So the next question is Japan going to terminate FIT scheme? I think the underlying of the question will be asking the perspectives of solar plus energy storage system in the C&I facilities. And any comment on that?
Yeah, I think that they have already decided to terminate. Okay. In terms of solar, they have terminated for the solar over 250 kilowatt, and I think that that they will terminate FIT for onshore wind, maybe in a few years if feed-in premium comes in. I'm not sure about offshore wind and geothermal. They may also biomass. They will stay for another several years, at least, I hope.
Okay. So, okay, appreciate you can address. So, so now let's welcome our next presenter, Mr. Massimiliano. Hi, Massimiliano. Can you open your camera?
Yes. Give me a second.
Yes.
Okay, I'm going
Thanks
to share
again
the screen.
yeah. Can you share your screen now?
Hold on a second.
Okay.
Is it fine?
Yes, we can see that.
All right.
Everything is good.
All right. So, Zoe, first, let me thank you and your organization for inviting me to these events. I'm very happy to be here. I'm Massimiliano Francone, Head of Global Origination at Enel Power. I would like to spend a couple of minutes to introduce Enel Group. They actually is one of the largest global utility in the world. Before COVID, we were the second for capitalization in the world. We are present in 35 countries and 5 continents. We currently manage over 85 gigawatt of installed capacity. 50% of that is from renewable to produce over 200 terawatt hours. Half of that is emission free. We then manage more than 2.2 million kilometers of distributed network around the world, and we have over 70 million end users for a total revenue of 80.3 billion euros and a total market capitalization of 79.6. We put at the center of our business the sustainability. We adhere to 6 of UN Sustainable Development Goals, and we have a very long path into the sustainability, and that has been make us recognized one of the leader in sustainability from utilities, and for the 3rd years in a row, we were recognized by Fortune among the company who can change the world. Briefly about our business, we have many different business, and they are organized into 6 different divisions. The first is thermal generation, so produce energy from conventional power plants, coal and gas. We already announced our phase out from coal by 2025, and our final goal is to be totally green producer by 2050. And then our division infrastructure and network to manage the 2.2 million kilometers of network with the intention to expand these assets. And then the retailers, we have many retailers around the world selling commodities, power and gas to customers in the industry and in the consumer markets. And then our global trading has managed our portfolio to optimize and extract more value. The new bird, Enel, that is a division taking care of the behind-the-meter services that includes efficiency, distributed generation, demand response, and mobility, infrastructure, and mobility services. And then finally, Enel Power, that is the renewable arm, that is being merged together last year with our thermal generation to accelerate the decarbonization process that we announced last year. And then coming to Enel Power, this is one of the leaders of renewable energy in the world, presence over 30 countries. We're currently managing over 1,300 renewable plants for a total employee of 7,600. The capacity installed nowadays is 46 gigawatt, divided into the main technologies, wind, hydro, solar, and geothermal, that allow us to produce more than 100 terawatt hours of renewable energy. We have a very challenging industrial growth plan, 2020-2022. We want to realize and put in place new 14.1 giga, dividing more or less 50% in wind and solar in many different geographies, from US, South America, Europe, Asia, and of course, Italy and Spain. This is a great challenge because it means that we have to do 4 giga this year, 5 next year, and 5 on 2022. Let's see what we did last year. We realized we built up new, it was a record for us, new 3 giga of capacity. Main country were US and Canada, Mexico, and South America. And in the meantime, we signed 4.1 giga on new contracts. Main country, US, South America, and there was the booming of Europe as well, specifically in Spain. You can see from this picture what's happening in the market right now, that we have a huge transition from first feed-in tariff, then tender, and now most of our contracts are secured through PPA, both with commercial industrial customers and utility. This is the new trends of the renewable, and this is the essential tools to develop new capacity. Why are customers so hungry about corporate PPA? There are three main advantages that Mr. Kajimura mentioned before. First, the huge message for the sustainability. Thanks to a corporate PPA that is a long-term contract to supply renewable energy from a new renewable project to an end user, the customer can claim to the market that thanks to these contracts, he allowed to build a new renewable project, giving their contribution to the fight against climate change. So this is called additionality that is became essential in every sustainability strategy of our customers. The second advantage on the table for the customers are with a long-term contract, they expect, of course, a potential cost saving. And the third is an hedging. So nobody, very few buy 100% of the consumers buy corporate PPA. Normally they buy a share of that. And that means an hedging against the variability of the power markets, because a corporate PPA is not exposed to all the variables that are influencing the power market. I don't spend too much time about the difference because Mr. Kajimura did very well before me, but just for you to remember, PPA on-site, SLIB physical, and the so-called financial contract for difference of virtual. Mr. Kajimura already explained very well the difference among the three different kind of contracts. Let's have a look on structure and risk. What is the normal volume that the customer buy? Starting from the cheapest to the most expensive. The cheapest is pay-as-generated because we, as a producer, we don't have any risk. We're gonna supply whatever we're gonna produce, and so we don't have risk in volume. Then there's a pay-as-forecast. Then the price is a bit higher because we have to include the imbalancing cost and the difference between what we produce and what we forecast. So there's a risk that we have to put on price. And then pay as contracted. This is the most common kind of contract with CNI that normally go for fixed volume monthly or base load. It means that the price raise up because we have to consider many different risks, shape risk, and unbalancing cost. And in case of base load, maybe including blending with other kind of technology. And then the last one is pay as consumed. So we follow exactly the consumption of the customers. And that, of course, is the most expensive because in addition to all the risks we have to consider as well, surely is needed a blending with maybe wind, solar, and hydro. Talking about the price, the most common is fixed price. It used to be the most common. Now the market is changing a lot. Fixed price that normally is a CPI index, or can be flat. It depends on the agreement with the customers. Or variable. Variable, there are many different forms. Of course, a variable price comes together with a collar, so a cap, a floor, to protect both sides, the generators and the customers. And the variable price can be linked to spot price or some tariff or other kind of commodity as we did in the past. And then, of course, there's influence on the price location. Some market has price node, some other has price zonal, so it's something that we have to take care of. And then, of course, influences for the currency, because having a presence in many different countries, currency is an issue for us. What are the risks that we have to take into consideration? First, the micro risk, interest rates, exchange on the currency, CPI, and then execution risk. We normally engage ourselves with the customers to deliver energy starting from a certain date. If we get longer, we have to pay penalty, and that's a risk that we have to evaluate. And then being a contract of 10, 12, 15 and more years, we are exposed to the regulatory risk, changing law, changing tasks, of course, changing in market rules. And of course, we have to regulate into the contract how to face this in case it happens, a change in this kind of issue. And then, extremely important, the counterparty risk. We as a generator are exposed to the default of our customer, as well as the customer is exposed to the default of the generators. Default means a termination. A termination means recontracting the energy that we agree with our customers, probably with a different price. So we have to go what we call mark-to-market analysis to understand how much is this risk in terms of early termination. And then a risk about the volume. Renewable energy are, for their nature, intermittent. So this is a risk that is basic for this kind of technology. And then the price associated the volume risk, so price on shape, profile, and balancing. And then, of course, the risk for the kind of market. It can be a zone or nodal, the volatility of the spot, and then any other direct cost that can be added on this kind of contract. So whenever we go into this contract with a customer, that is a very long relationship, because you have to consider that normal negotiation lasts between 9 months and 1 year. First, we go for deciding what kind of price and structure, and then decide what kind of risk will be on the generation side and what kind of risk will be on the customer side. But this is a trend that's unstoppable. Corporate PPA are increasing a lot. There's a huge change in our corporation strategy, because sustainability is now central for many different reasons. First reason, they have customers who want to buy sustainable products. Second, all the financial institutions and banks are now lending money just or investing in companies that just set targets in sustainability. And third, there's a domino effect on the supply chain. Now, the first mover are ones that their supply chain are sustainable as well, because that sustainability has to include in not only the customer, but their supply chain afterwards and downwards. So the huge movement that grew up, nowadays 800, 300 people apply to CDP to disclose their financial risk. In this presentation, we talk about 817 companies, but now they become 900 companies that adhere to science-based targets, that have the company to set the targets and have them to reach the targets. And more than 220 companies adhere to RE100, so the company who decide to be 100% renewable by a certain dates. Among all the possibility that the company has to go green, corporate PPA is the one who grew a lot in the last 3-4 years. You can see in the pictures, 3% on the available technology were from corporate PPA in 2015, and now 2018 went 20, and 2019 we don't have the official data, but we know that we're close to 30s. Mr. Kajimura already showed the great growth of corporate PPA. In the words, we get to 19.5 gigas secured through corporate PPA. But the most interesting picture is one did by sectors. So at the beginning, there was the big tech and the food, and now all the sectors are moving to a corporate PPA. The huge effect of the domino and the supply chain are already encourage all the other sectors to move on. So pharmaceutical, chemical, financial, steel, all of them now are looking for corporate PPA with different approach. But this is a huge. Just to mention automotive now they are converting them in electrical car maker that is a sustainable products. They cannot do it if they're not sustainable from first feeding their factory with renewable energy, and they cannot do, and they have to feed as well the vehicles with renewable energy. And the supply chain automotive is huge, that includes many different sectors. So these are a huge effect on the market. Just talking about current power results, we were on the largest. Till 2019, we signed 7.2 giga of PPA, both for utility and CNI. So a total of around 90 contracts signed with many different countries: Australia, Brazil, Chile, Colombia, Mexico, Panama, Spain, US, and many different companies, big brand of different sectors, as I mentioned. So big tech, food, chemical, pharmaceutical, retailer. So it's a wave that are hitting the market heavily. And now focus a deep dive on Asia Pacific. We are present in focus on 4 markets. First, Australia. We are over 275 megawatt in operation, 34 under construction, and we have a huge pipeline that is ready to bid mostly for a corporate PPA. India, we signed yesterday, we were awarded the new 450 mega solar project that is going to add to the 170 already in operation and the 300 under construction. India is a country is going to grow up a lot, so we are there and we have established there, so it's a target for us. And then Vietnam, we have a pipeline of around 1,000 megawatt. You know that there's a pilot for the first direct PPA, so we're going to be part of that, and we are working hard on defining together with the government how to get to this goal that is extremely important for the country. And then presence in South Korea, we have a pipeline of 400 megawatts, mainly dedicated for solar action and attribute contracts. A final view on what we can do as a group. We are focusing on all scope 1, scope 2, and scope 3 of our customers because we have a very large portfolio among the different divisions. So we are now able to provide certification of reforestation to offsetting all the thermal production of the companies. We can provide services to do together with our customer, create shared value project with the local community. Of course, efficiency, demand response, utility bill management by Enel. Utility bill management helps the customers to manage the large number of invoices. And of course, then PPA, including retail offers, so we can provide a full supply to our customer, part covered by a long-term PPA, a part covered by a short-term supply of energy. It can be renewable with the adding of attributes. And then we can provide to our customer dashboard to check and control every second what's going on in their contracts for the corporate PPA, so checking the production of the generator and checking the consumption of the loads. And then through Enel we can provide on-site PPA, on-site renewable, and all the solution of e-mobility. Now, we end up with some case, just to give you the many different potentiality that we have with corporate PPA. We start with a contract we signed last year with Mondelez, that is a giant in cookies manufacturing. From our project in Texas, Roadrunner, that is more or less 500 megawatt solar, we allocate 65 megawatt PPA to supply Mondelez production. And thanks to this contract, they were able to reduce 50% the CO2 emission in their manufacturing activities. And the claim to the market, that thanks to this contract, 50% of the Oreo, that is their most famous cookies, are produced with renewable energy. This is another customer with different sectors, retailer, Gap. We supply 1,500 retail stores on the US market through a virtual contract from our Aurora wind project in North Dakota, 300 megawatt of project. We allocate 90 mega for a 12 years contract to supply these 1,500 stores. That is more or less the 50% of the store worldwide. Thanks to this contract, that we were able to cut 250,000 tons of CO2 per year. And another kind of contract, we are talking about Chile. We create our green label. It's some years ago. At that time, there was no any IREX. They adhere at Chile adhere recently, and we supply energy from our portfolio. And because there were no availability to any attributes of international scheme, we create our own label. Making the claim reliable. So through a third party, we certify that all the energy produced from our plants has been delivered to our customer and consumed to the customer. So, of course, we did it to make it reliable to a third party that certify these activities. And then just to show you that from one project, we can supply many different takers and many different kind of takers, from a Mexican Dominica wind farm in Mexico, of course, 100 megawatt. We supply Citibanamex, that is a bank branch, 300 in Mexico. We supply Coca-Cola FEMSA, that is a factory. We supply OXXO, that are pharmacies and convenience stores. And we supply Brush, that is a factory, from one single project. Of course, each one has been negotiated independently, and each one has its own tailor-made contracts. And then what was very famous for us, a contract with IPPA, that is one of the largest brewer in the world, very famous for Budweiser and Corona, from our Thunder Ranch wind farm in Oklahoma, that is 300 megawatt capacity project. We allocate 50% of this project for IPPA, and thanks to this contract, as a virtual PPA, they were able to reduce the carbon footprint of 30%. I will end with a PPA in Spain. This is very interesting because it's a full supply. So BBVA is a bank. We feed the bank branch. 30% under long-term PPA and 70% from retail multi-click supply, including the guarantee origin, so the attributes in Europe. That's it. Wherever we have a retailer in the world, we are able to cover all these aspects, the full supply. So thank you for your attention.
Hi, thanks, Massimiliano, for your kind and informative address. This is highly appreciated. And now let's move to the Q&A sector. Just wait me 1 second.
Yeah.
Okay, so while we go through the part 1 prepared questions, everyone of the audience, please feel free to raise the questions of use in the Q&A box, while we will go through it later. So the first questions for Ms. Milano, typical PPA structure in Europe with respect to size, tenor, and the tariff design. What's your opinion?
Tenor in Europe is between 8 to 12. But the kind of structure are very different because it depends on the nationality of the company. Euro market is a different pace. Booming in Spain, the renewable are very competitive, already boom in the Nordics, and the pace instead in Italy, France, and Germany is very slow because there's the scarcity of projects right now, and the competitiveness of the market, of the PPA against the spot market, the forward market is still to be defined. Anyway, American company, for example, love virtual PPA, so you can provide a virtual contract from a plant, for example, in Spain, to offset all the consumption in Europe. European companies prefer physical delivery. The tenor always 10 to 12. So the success of this kind of contracts depends on the country. So Spain, we have project and competitiveness, so we can make it deal. Nordic as well. Much difficult in many other countries. Another country is extremely promising in Poland, but still is under a changement in the approach to the green deal.
Okay, so Mr. Milano, I think you were touching your microphone. Can you, Sarah, it's a little bit background noises. May you kindly check?
Hold on a second.
Okay.
How is it now?
Better now. Great. So maybe we can move to the second question. The transition from FIT to tender to corporate sourcing is happening in most countries of Asia. Do you believe that this transition from FIT to liberalize the market will follow Europe trend and timelines?
transition from FIT to tender already happened everywhere in the world. So most of the countries are passing from FIT to tender because, of course, FIT is an app to develop the renewable energy. Tender is to make it competitive. The passage to corporate sourcing is much more complicated. It's really related to the competitiveness of the PPA in the specific market. So, as I mentioned, for example, in Europe, some countries like Spain and Norway boom because they are extremely competitive against the spot market and forward market. Some others are still to verify going to be competitive because there is scarcity of project and the competition with the today market is tough. So it's a way to improve the SOE of the renewable project against the forward markets of the local markets.
Okay, so next question is, would you expect new form or model of corporate sourcing emerge in the next 3 years?
That's a very interesting question. So I testify what happened now in the market. So the first mover, talking about the first mover, the one the company that already in the sustainability since a long time, already buy corporate PPA. Now they are facing two big challenges. The first is how to make sustainable supply chain.
Hi, Massimiliano, sorry for interrupting.
Yeah.
Maybe you can lower down the voice because the voice is still breaking.
Let me try without microphone if it works better.
Yeah.
Does it work better right now?
Oh, it's not great. It's already better now.
Can you hear me?
Can you open your microphone and then we can test your voice?
Does it work right now?
Yes.
Okay,
Can
fine.
you see? Okay, great.
So I was telling, it's a very interesting question because I can testify what's going on in the market right now. Talking about the company and the sector that are already in the sustainability food or this kind of sectors that are already buying corporate PPA since a long time. Now they are facing two main challenges. The first challenge is how to make the supply chain sustainable. So they are working on that because it's not an easy thing to do. They have to ask their supplier to do something to be sustainable. So there are now a soft invitation. I think we believe that in the future will be an obligation. If you want to work with me, you have to be sustainable. The second challenge that they are facing is the make sustainable and make the carbon reduction not only for electricity part, but as well for the thermal consumption. Talking about hot water, steam, and so on. They can do in two ways. First, electrifying their consumption, and second, find a way to feed it with some renewable sources. Nowadays, what they are doing, they are buying certificate for forestation, but of course, they are the exception of greenwashing. So I believe in the future about the green hydrogen, that will be the next frontier, or maybe biogas or biomass, that of course is a niche market.
Okay, we understood. So the next question, based on EGP's interaction with corporate buyers, what are the expectations from RE100 members regarding green energy provision? Are the evaluation criteria different from less renowned brands? For example, local manufacturing plants in Vietnam.
Let's say two sides. From customer side, I don't see differences in approach from, let's say, big brand and less renowned brands. It depends really on the sectors. Every sector has its own approach. I'll make you an example. A steel maker that normally has a cost of energy of 30% of their production cost, of course, are going to have a very aggressive approach to the corporate PPA, looking for a good price in the long term. Somebody, for example, in the food that the cost production is lower percentage to the cost production, that will be available for a premium price. So it's not a matter of brand, it's a matter of sectors. From the point of view of the generators, of course, it can change because normally large corporation, international corporation, have say a parent company to guarantee to the contracts. And when we go with local company, normally they don't have this umbrella, so they have to provide some secureness for the contract. That can be a problem. Well, a small differences can be that normally the local company look for local project. On the opposite, great corporations are open to, or as I mentioned before, maybe virtual contracts from a specific country that supply an area. That's how the main difference among the two kind of customers. I cannot hear you, Zoe. Your microphone is mute.
Oh, sorry. Thank you so much.
Sorry.
Due to the timeline limits, I don't think we need to go through all the questions. Maybe it's time for us to move to the Q&A box. Yeah.
Okay.
Okay. May I suggest the first questions from Mr. Nam EI Chami? The question was for the Japan market, but I'd like to raise the same question to you. In the European market, what's the role of renewable plus energy storage system as the era of grid parity? Hi, Mr. Massimiliano.
Sorry, is the Nicholas question you mentioned? Sorry, Zoe, I missed part of your question. Is Nicholas first questions?
Is the first question from the name EI Chami. The question was for the Japan market, but I'd like to raise the same question to you for the European market. What's the role of renewable energy plus energy storage system as the era of grid parity?
Right. Talking about on-site PPA, on-site roof solar.
Yes.
Yeah, that is a market that is start to grow. And it's quite competitive for consumers, so small consuming. It's not competitive for industrial case, and we strongly believe it's gonna be competitive in a couple of years because price of energy storage battery is going down. So we are not far to be close to a business model. But there are a certain development among the small consumer. First, not because the economicity, sustainability economical of the business, but because they want to be green, off-grid, and be part of this huge change.
Okay, we understood. So the next question is from Nicholas. What type of PPA is the most popular with EU customers? What are the relative popularities of the 4 types of you outlined at the beginning?
Leaving out the on-site PPA, it is domain of Enel in our company. Let's say that talking about, for example, American market, that is our main market. We personally do 60% of our deal are financial and 40% are physical. In order to make a physical deal, you need to have in the middle a retailers, a so-called market agent. We don't have it in US, so normally we work together with other players to make a physical delivery through a market agent. In other countries like Europe, most of the deal would be physical because virtual is considered according to the international accounting system as a derivative, and the American GAAP allow the American to deal it easily than the European one. So most of the European company will go with direct physical PPA, and that of course we can do in Europe easily because we have a lot of retailers in Europe, in Italy, in Spain, in Germany, in Belgium, in Netherlands. So otherwise you have to go through another place to make the delivery directly to the customers.
Okay, so Thank you so much, Ms. Milano. Great presentation and appreciate again. Yeah. Okay, so now maybe let's move to the next presentation, which is a joint session by Mr. Rasmus and Mr. Hugh. Can you share your screen? Yes. So, yes. So welcome our next presenter, Mr. Rasmus and Mr. Hugh.
Yes, definitely. Can you hear us?
Yes, we can.
And I guess you're there as well, Hugh, right?
Yep, I'm here. Thank you.
Okay,
yeah.
Great. Should we just get going?
Yeah, you can start.
Okay, thank you very much. So this presentation is going to be a shared presentation between Hwaseung Enterprise and Act Renewable. And the two companies has come together in a collaboration in Vietnam specifically because we are both partners with Adidas. Act Renewable is the strategic renewable energy advisor for Adidas and their supply chain initiative globally. And Hwaseung is a very important supplier to Adidas in Vietnam. So what we're going to talk you through today is really to try and understand this PPA or this renewable topic from the corporate side. And as you've just seen from the two previous presenters, the focus is very much on the bigger brands and what they will do. And I think what we need to look at in Southeast Asia, and the reason why we have decided to come together here, Act Renewable and Hwaseung, is basically to try and give this perspective from a local footwear manufacturer's perspective. So this is you could say this is exactly one of the examples that was mentioned before from Enel, that we're going to talk about a supplier to the brands and how they are looking at the world of renewables in Southeast Asia specifically. And going forward. So we will have this presentation jointly. So any questions that you will have, feel free to raise them, and we will find out who will be sort of in the best position to answer the questions. The agenda looks like this. We'll have a short introduction, then we'll talk about the multinational corporate perspective and the challenges and solutions. Then we'll talk about the specific corporate PPAs in Vietnam, who I'm sure everybody interested in this topic is aware of. And then we will go into the local footwear suppliers' perspective and the considerations and challenges that they are facing moving into this space and trying to follow their brand clients on this journey going forward. Hugh, would you like to introduce yourself quickly?
Yep, sure. Thank you very much. Happy to be here. My name is Hugh Hamill. I'm a strategic advisor for Hwaseung Enterprise. I've been with them for about 6 years. Prior to that, I was senior vice president for Reebok in charge of global operations. So I was in charge of global sourcing, development, and costing. I was there about 22 years. Unlike everybody else on this call, I'm not an expert in this area. I'm a footwear guy. So I have 36 years in the business from a footwear perspective, and 26 of those years have been based overseas. I've lived in Korea, Indonesia, Hong Kong, and currently right now I'm in Vietnam. So, Rasmus?
Thank you. Yeah. So my name is Rasmus Nedergaard. I'm the managing director of Act Renewable. Act Renewable is a strategic renewable energy consultancy based in Germany, but we work with multinational brands all over the world and with their supply chains. We advise them on the best journeys for reaching their renewable energy targets. We are absolutely renewable technology or product agnostic. We don't care if our clients are interested in certificates or PPAs or direct investments in wind or solar. What we're most interested in is to make sure that they meet their needs and that we get them across the line at the and meet the target that they have set. I have 15 years personally experience in the renewable space, and before joining as managing director for Act Renewable here in Germany, I'm originally Danish, and I've worked 10 years for Vestas, and lately as a senior manager on energy and renewables for the Lego Group, helping them across the line to 100% renewable energy. So let's move a little bit further here. So Act Renewable, what we basically do is that we sit there as the initiator of corporates being able to transition into renewables. If you remember some of the graphics that you saw before, where you saw the sectors and you saw the amount of PPAs being signed, that's actually down to a very limited number of companies. In Europe, for instance, last year, I believe the number is between 20 and 30 corporate PPAs were signed, and about half of them was signed by Google alone. So there are very few companies that currently are able to sign a PPA, and that has to be accelerated if we need to be able to reach our targets going forward. So what we do at Act Renewable is basically that we help the corporates reduce the complexity of their renewable challenge, understand what they need to do and where they need to do it in order to come across the finish line and get as much renewable in their portfolio as they need. The way we do that is that we've mapped out a simple path for corporates. Generally, all corporates follow this path here. Some are more advanced than others, and some have been taking these in slightly different order. But basically, they need to understand what does the world around them look like, where are they based, what's their footprint. Then they need to have commitments, either that being internal commitments or science-based target commitments, RE100 commitments, or UNFCCC commitments. Then they need to create a strategy, and the strategy is very much depending on what's the preference of the company itself, because not every company is suited for a PPA. Some have a fluctuating energy consumption, which is not suited for a long-term fixed offtake agreement. And once that's in place, we usually support the companies setting up the procurement plans globally to make sure that they're able to implement and ultimately realize their renewable energy goals. Working in this space for many, many years, we found out that there are three things that is common for every single corporate around the world when they're engaging in renewables. Three sets of complexities. And these sets of complexity are relevant right from the first time you enter until the very last step of your journey. And that is creating a business case. Now, a business case is not just about money, and especially within renewables, it's also about brand value, where's your position with your consumers, where's your position with your clients. That's something that has to be taken into consideration in such a discussion. And creating those business cases, making sure that you have the right data, that you understand where your opportunities lie, and what your limitations are, and what good business case looks like for you, and compare it with what is actually available in the space that you're entering into. That's important. Secondly, there's the technology. Most companies do have a preference for whatever reason, either because they come from the US market and their PPAs are very abundant, or they have a preference for certificate trading because they've done that for a number of years in other parts of the world. But the fact is that those technologies and these renewable energy products that surrounds them as PPAs are not available everywhere. So you need to modify your approach to technologies. And what we generally see here is that the more diverse, the better it is, because no company will be able to rely on a single line strategy for renewable integration. And then finally, we have the financing part. I would even sometimes say the fun part, because this is where there are, if you just go back 10, 15 years from now, there was a lot of direct investments in renewables. And now most of the technologies and the products has become mainstream or common sense. And with the current stock market, the uncertainty, we are also seeing that a lot of money is being funneled into renewables as a safe infrastructure investment. And therefore, there is a lot of money available in parts of the world, at least, to fund. So you have still the option to direct invest yourself, but there is also opportunities for third-party investment here, both CapEx, OpEx, multiple opportunities. So those three areas of complexity is really what we try to crystallize with our clients and make sure that they fully understand what risk they're taking, choosing one or the other renewable pathways. Over to you, Hugh.
Okay, thanks. A little bit about Hwaseung Group first. It is a Korean company with headquarters in Seoul. The company actually started in 1953 as a footwear manufacturer in Korea. And then from there, it branched out into other areas. We moved into the chemical area, then we moved into the automotive area, and we've also moved into distribution. So Hwaseung Group is about a $4.5 billion company. We employ about 54,000 people worldwide. We have a presence in 33 countries. And Hwaseung Enterprise is the division of the company that we're talking about now. So that's who I'm representing, and that's who we're working with from the Adidas perspective. And we're, last year, 2019, we were a little bit over $1 billion in revenue. And then, next slide. As far as HS Enterprise is concerned, a little bit more information. We manufacture in 3 countries of origin, Vietnam, China, and Indonesia. We will be producing in India within the next 3 years. We're working with Adidas right now on a plan for that. We're a little bit unique in the industry in that we only produce shoes for Adidas. We're the 2nd largest supplier for them in terms of volume and revenue. So we represent about 20% of their global volume. We produce some of their most important product. If you have a familiarity with Adidas product, Boost is a major product for them, and 4D, which is a 3-dimensional molded bottom. So they're the technologies that we have future development centers within our facility in Vietnam. Just to give you a little bit of an idea, the company started, as I mentioned, in 1953, but then we restarted again in 2012. We restarted in Vietnam, and you can see on the graph on the left-hand side how the company has grown over the years. In 2002, we were only producing 200,000 pairs of shoes a month, and that was for Reebok. You can see that we expanded to a 2nd country of origin and into China, and then eventually a 3rd country of origin in Indonesia. So from 2002, where we were only making 200,000 pairs a month, currently last year we were making over 7.2 million pairs per month. So that gives you a little bit of an idea of who HS Enterprise is.
Thanks, Hugh. Right, so what we're trying to bring into this conversation is the corporate perspective. Now you've heard from 2 developers analyzing the market and giving really good perspective on what that looks like. Now we're going to step onto the other side and really try to sort of see it with the glasses of the corporates here. And the first thing you can ask yourself is, what do they want? And it's pretty simple. They just want credible, renewable energy, and that's it. Most corporates do not want to sign a PPA. They do not want to have a rooftop on their roof. They are probably not even knowledgeable of what that is, because they're used to just procuring electricity as a commodity from wherever they are. It's all about plug and play. So when you, as a developer or an advisor in this space, you really need to think about what the corporates are looking for. And in this case, they're looking for credible renewable energy, to the reasons that Enel very nicely explained, that there is a requirement, almost I would say, from their suppliers, from the consumers and from the brands to the suppliers, to make sure that not only the energy is renewable, but it's also credible. Now, that of course is easy said, but it's very hard to get in parts of the world, and especially in Southeast Asia. So what the corporates also want is that they want low complexity in the products that they purchase. They want to take as low risk as possible. They want to understand what they're engaging in, i.e. the lowest, the best kind of transparency. Many corporates are very keen on visibility, because they want to be able to show that what they're doing, at least that's what they're doing right now. you could say, if I could just pause for a second here, you could say that there are two types of corporates. There are the corporates that are entering into renewable energy for cost savings as a first priority, and then you have the ones that are entering into renewables as almost as a brand perspective as the first priority. I would say if you go back about 10 years, it was all brand because the prices were higher on renewables. Now prices has come down, and in many cases they're even lower than the alternatives in the markets. And that's where visibility comes into play. Then they want credibility. And credibility is best practice. There is no standard for what good looks like. There is no preference. There are RE100 who has an idea of what it looks like. There are others out there that has a different opinion on what the priority should look like. But generally, you want credibility. So you need to be able to prove that what you're doing is also accepted as a good opportunity to actually claim your renewable status. And then they want scalability. And that goes both ways. So again, signing a PPA is a great way of upscaling your uptake of renewable energy. But if you down the line will need to reduce it, then that becomes a problem because you have likely signed a long-term contract for a fixed price for a fixed amount. So scalability in both ways is what a lot of companies are also looking to get into. So the commitments that I mentioned before that we're looking at from a corporate perspective, we have listed 5 of them here. For the sake of the story here, where we sort of have added us in the mix as well, we have listed the UN Fashion Industry Charter for Climate Action. We believe that is one of the strongest commitments in the market today because in contrast to RE100, which is only focusing on the brands themselves, and if we take a brand like Adidas, they have less than 1% of their carbon footprint in their so-called scope 2 emissions, so their own consumption from offices, warehouses, and stores, and that's what RE100 is focusing on. Whereas the UN Fashion Industry Charter for Climate Action is focusing on the full value chain. That means supply chain, i.e. the upstream, and even the consumer, the downstream, which means that a 30% emission reduction here is much, much, much higher than what the signatories of, or at least within the fashion industry that has signed the RE100. Whereas if you have your own manufacturing footprint within your control, then of course the RE100 is a much, much stronger commitment. But for a company like Hwaseung, they basically have to look at the UN Fashion Industry Charter because they know that for Adidas to be able to meet this charter, they will have to deliver almost all of the 30% emission reductions required. And that counts for all the suppliers in this space. And with 100 signatories, I would say the entire apparel and sportswear industry across Indonesia, Vietnam, and the rest of Southeast Asia, this is almost becoming a common goal that any supplier will need to be able to reduce 30% of their emission reduction by 2030 if their brands are to succeed on this journey. So I think that's a very powerful commitment made. Then you've got the Fashion Pact, which is a European pact started in France during a G7 meeting last year. Then you've got the Science-Based Target. The Science-Based Target is really an interesting target and commitment made because first of all, it's science-based. So it links to the 1.5 degrees or the 2-degree temperature change max that the IPCC set out as the goal, and then it's basically backtracking it to how much do you as an individual company need to comply. And if 40% of your carbon footprint sits in your supply chain has to be included in your science-based target. And that means that in most cases, the science-based target is really, again, relying on the scope 3 emission being reduced, and the scope 3 emission also includes, besides manufacturing footprint, flights and travel, distribution, and so on. And then, of course, you have the old lady in the room being the Carbon Disclosure Project, now just called CDP, where brands are disclosing and committing to emission reductions and basically sharing across a wider platform. So those are generally the most important commitments that we're seeing out there, and they're all pushing in one direction, and that is reduction of emissions, not only within electricity, which approximately takes up about 50%, but also in heat and others. Within the Fashion Charter, for instance, there is, besides a 30% emission reduction, there is also a pledge to say that no new coal, and they're basically looking at phasing out coal for heating. So a lot of the Southeast Asian manufacturing plants that are using significant amount of heat will have to find alternatives to coal within the next 10 years. Yeah. So the challenges that the corporates are generally facing is demand and supply fluctuations. Now, Hwaseung is producing plus 7 million pairs of shoes per month for Adidas and Reebok, but I'm quite sure that the COVID-19 has impacted their production and therefore also their electricity consumption. So you ask yourself there, how do you mitigate that risk? How do you make sure that you're still supplied with renewable energy, but you're allowing yourself to grow and shrink, open up factories, potentially close down factories as you move along? That's one of the challenges that many corporates are facing with respect to renewable energy. Then you've got the low flexibility in solutions. There is the scalability. If you're looking at rooftop opportunities, that's fine. It's the first thing you would go for. It's simple, it's visible, and it's usually a good business case, but it's not scalable. It will not meet your demand for most manufacturing companies. Then you've got the contractual terms. Now you're basically asking a company who was usually just purchasing energy off the market, or even in some cases off a single provider in an industrial park, to now look into how to procure energy at a much more complex level. So the contractual terms here are tying your hands up. For instance, the long-term agreements of the PPA in Southeast Asia being between 12 and 20 years. How do you mitigate such a low flexibility in your production and in your business? Then you've got the legislative framework complexity. Depending on what country you're in, there is a whole new set of legislation. Many of these companies, including Hwaseung, are producing in multiple countries at the same time. They're even shifting production around depending on whether Adidas needs more boost this year than they did last year. And therefore, of course, they need to understand the legislative framework sitting around renewables for every country in which they operate. And that is a challenge if you didn't even have to think about legislative frameworks for energy before. And then, of course, you have the lack of available solution at scale. Today, we have been speaking a lot about PPAs, and it is the talk of town. It's been that in Europe for many, many years, and the US for even longer. But if you look across the globe, there aren't actually that many countries where PPAs are available. It's actually quite limited. I can't put an exact number on, but I would say it's probably in the 20s at max. And that means that if you're not in these countries, then solutions at scale may not be available to you to the kind of quality that you're actually looking to. So that's also a problem. If we take the case of Hwaseung here, yes, we're engaging in the DPPA program in Vietnam together, but what if they now shift their production to China? What kind of opportunities do they have there at the same scale? And then the time pressure. A lot of the brands are signed up to 25, 2030 targets. That's only between 4.5 and 10 years away. And that means that things really has to move fast here. Legislative framework has to change rapidly, be able for companies to accommodate, and the investments also has to be available. And then, as I've said before, delivering on these targets really relies on third party for many brands. H&M, the Sarah Group, they all rely on their suppliers and how they cooperate with the suppliers, because now it's a contractual relationship with a contract of between a year and 2-3 years maybe, but that may have to change if we are to be able to get any deeper on this topic. So the solutions that we're looking into as an advice sort of from our side is that if you look at the developer side, we simply need the developers to be more creative on develop renewable energy products. And the more diversity, the better. I would say as a corporate advisor, what we are seeing right now even from the PPA contracts, that they're very developer centric. They are tilted towards that the developer needs the PPA to be able to sell their project at the end to an investor, which in many cases is fine. But it is just emerging at the moment that the corporates also have an opinion on what such a risk profile should look like. For the governments, we need solid legal frameworks that really support corporate transition to renewable energy, and we need it fast. Especially if we look at Southeast Asia, some of the certificate schemes are developing, but too slow. If we look at the PPA schemes that we're seeing in Vietnam is developing, but is postponed and too slow, and the same in Malaysia and other countries as well. So basically, we lead the corporates to support, and the developers and the corporates really support the government with what do they need for these frameworks. So more integration with the governments and much more solid frameworks to progress. And then on the corporate side, the corporates also has a chance here. They need to work much harder sector specific. So in many cases, the manufacturing footprint within the electronic industry, chemical industry, and the apparel industry will have a huge benefit from cooperating because they generally share the same supply chain with the same challenges. So we suggest that there is a focus on, from the corporate side, really to align and standardize the request and expectation to the suppliers. So the suppliers doesn't have 5 different expectations from 5 different clients to what a renewable program should look like, because that was just going to break it all down and make it way more complicated for the suppliers to deliver on all of their clients' expectations. And then we need the suppliers to act differently. So far, the suppliers has been very reactive. They are not moving unless their clients are telling them to. But what we are seeing is that by making renewable energy a proactive business opportunity for suppliers, then there may actually be more clients in the future, because as Enel mentioned before, this is what they are being requested to do. So, but they need to understand that it also comes with an investment, both in terms of time, knowledge, and money to be able to develop into this space. And then, of course, we need the brands to favorizing or incentivizing the suppliers taking these climate actions, potentially looking at some of the contract structures that they're offering, maybe backing up if that is required financially on certain projects. And that's also something that we're seeing in the market right now. So those were sort of the breakdown between developers, governments, and corporates. Now, moving into the corporate PPA pilot in Vietnam, the picture on the right side has already been shared twice today, so I'm not going to go into it. But basically, we're looking at a virtual PPA, or so-called contract for difference. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this because I'm sure you've already know. Otherwise, you have the slides. But basically, it's explained by earlier, is that it's a contract for difference where you are relying on a certain price point, and then if the price is lower, then you receive money from the generator. If the price is higher, then you have to pay money for the. So that is basically part of the risk here. So the aim of the DPPA framework from the Vietnamese government is twofold. First, it is to attract more investments from foreign brands, and they know that the foreign brands need renewable energy to be able to do so. So this is one of the ways to do it. And then secondly, they need to build out their electricity capacity in the country, and this could potentially be a way to do it without having to do it themselves, but attract foreign investments directly into the infrastructure. So that's the goal as we see it. Now, the limitations that comes on this program, to be very honest, is that electricity in Vietnam is a cash cow for the government. They have monopoly on the supply, unless you're in an industrial park, which then again, of course, gets their supply from the authorities here. And that means that they're giving up part of their business and basically letting others engage into this space here. And then, of course, the big elephant in the room is, what's the price going to be? Currently, the program is, of course, not finalized yet. It has not been ultimately signed off. The expectation is that it will happen in the second half of this year, but nothing guaranteed. And the price components that we're looking at is this new wholesale market that has been established last year in Vietnam, basically to accommodate this opportunity here. And then it's the so-called DPPA charge, which is the distribution charge that the government is putting on top of the wholesale market price and on top of the CFD price, the strike price that has been agreed. So right now the prices are not clear, and it's not exactly clear what the different components are, but what we are seeing, without being able to disclose in details what prices we've been offered in the market, right now we're in the same vicinity as what the retail market price is, and then depending on what the size of the DPPA charge is going to be, it could either be slightly higher or slightly lower. But that's really what the framework looks like right now. Of course, the uncertainty on the price is the government going to change the DPPA price over the contract terms? So if a company like Hwaseung signs a 20-year deal, you know, when and how will the authorities be able to change the DPPA charge to make sure that they get either a larger piece of the pie? And what should the wholesale market look like? Remember, we are in a regulated market, which I believe is one of the first PPA setups that is being established in a regulated market. So that's something that is very interesting. So the Adidas model for engagement, if I may just spend a little time on this, is quite unique, we believe. What Adidas has decided to do is that they have engaged with Renewable to provide their technical support to strategic selected suppliers. So some of their strongest suppliers in Vietnam has been asked to join this program, and Hwaseung is amongst those. And then Adidas is offering them the technical service, the negotiation support, to basically manage their way through this PPA negotiation and ultimately through the application process with the authorities once a term sheet is signed. And what they do is that they match developers and suppliers. And in this case, we're able, because we have multiple suppliers available, Hwaseung is one, and they all have different consumptions and they have different load points. So we're actually able to mix and match the developers' projects and the size of the projects with the different Adidas suppliers. And through that matchmaking process, we were able to meet these criteria that the government has set very strict, at least what they're proposing to set quite strictly on the program. For instance, that the DPPA offtake or the CFD should cover at a minimum 80% of the electricity consumption of the load point that's part of the program. And then the last thing is that we're supporting Adidas in their work with the local government to really try and bring the corporate perspective in here. So it's not just the government perspective, it's also the developer perspective, as I'm sure Enel is working directly with them on, as well as mentioned here, but also the corporate perspective, which is then brought in by Adidas on behalf of their entire supply base in the country. And then just before I hand over to Hugh, then we've got the supplier perspective. Hwaseung is a very, very important supplier for Adidas and takes up a large share of the corporate footprint in the country. And therefore, it is important for Adidas to be able to meet their targets and ambitions and expectations from their consumers, that Hwaseung really joins this and invests time and effort into it. For Adidas, I think the most important thing in the beginning for this was that Hwaseung had the right mindset. And the right mindset here is a proactive mindset, where you take this as an opportunity and an opportunistic way of actually becoming renewable, and you have it as part of your strategy, as you will see from Hugh in a minute. And then the fact that Hwaseung is ambitious here, they're really trying to push the envelope and find opportunities, not only within the DPPA space, but also for rooftops and other opportunities they're pursuing, and really try to make this transition into renewables happen. So that's why we bring Hwaseung today and would like to bring this perspective forward. So I think I'll hand over to you, Hugh, and give you an opportunity to talk us through the perspective from your side.
Thank you. Thank you. As mentioned, my role is strategic advisor. So essentially, I'm responsible for creating and communicating the strategy of the company, both internally and externally. What I found actually externally, which is to Adidas, is quite easy. Sometimes internally is a little bit more difficult. to make sure Hwaseung as a corporation in multiple locations stays on the same strategy. So what we created in 2016, or what we utilized, is a very simple tool, a one-page document to keep the entire company on the same direction, so that we spend money in the right places. The programs we utilize are the correct ones, that, and the people we hire are the right ones. So we created this tool called OST, Objective, Strategy, and Tactics. We started it in 2016. We had one for 2020. And at that time, our objective was to become 20% of Adidas footwear volume by 2020. At the time we created it in 16, we were about 13%. So as I mentioned, we are 20%. So the tool was successful for us from 2016 to 2020. So at the end of 2019, we started to build on that and said, okay, where do we need to go for 2025? So what you see here is a one-page document that we use internally, and also we communicated externally to Adidas. As mentioned, we're a $1 billion company. We want to grow to $3 billion in 2025. We have 4 buckets of strategies. We call them differentiation, digital, specialization, and foundation. So those are programs that we know we have to work on in order to earn the capacity growth that we want to get from Adidas. What you see next to each one of them, like digital manufacturing or digital creation, those specific programs that we have. And each one of those programs, we create tactics against. So we create programs that are aligned to each one of those. And we have a person in charge of each one of those areas. And that person is in charge of creating a roadmap. So our intent was to use 2020 as building the roadmap year. So we wanted to build the roadmap to 2025 for each one of those strategies: digital manufacturing, digital creation, speed, manufacturing excellence, all those points. When we created this, what I recognize is that we were, I mentioned we're a Korean company, but we'd like to start thinking we're going to be a global company. So there was a couple things that were fundamentally missing, I thought, from our OST. And I built them to the bottom of the platform. One is human resources, a $1 billion company growing to $3 billion. We need expertise in many different areas than we used to. We need a strong human resource department. Digital is a good example of that. 3 or 4 years ago, digital was not even a word that was mentioned in footwear manufacturing. Now it's a critical part of how we operate. But the other area was sustainability. There's no way a $3 billion company who is 20% or more of Adidas's production could get to where they wanted to get without having a sustainability strategy. What I found when I looked around the company is that I had experts to fill every single slot in this OST except for sustainability. We didn't really have we had basically nothing. We didn't know exactly what we wanted to do. And frankly, it was falling to me in 2020 to determine what direction we should take from a sustainability perspective. Luckily, Adidas approached us, in March, and they said that, they had signed the UNFCCC and that they were interested in reducing the greenhouse carbon gas. They asked us to participate in the pilot program with Act Renewable. And then we met with Act Renewable. I think it was back in March that we started the program in Vietnam. So next slide. So since that time, we have, formulated I guess it's an elementary strategy, but it's a beginning, right? So this is where we currently are. We have 3 programs that we participate in. The first is rooftop solar. We deal with a company called Copper Mountain Energy. And we have put rooftop solar on 3 of our buildings, our newer buildings, in different locations. Essentially, in measuring it, this is only about 2% of our electrical usage on it. We also now are expanding as a company, and we have plans in place for at least 4 different new locations inside of Vietnam. And inside of those locations, the business model that we have with our internally is that what we do is we investigate the land that we want to utilize. Then we meet with a construction company. We ask the construction company to purchase the land. And then we work with the construction company to purpose build a factory for us. And then we rent the factory for a period of time from the construction company. And what we've been finding is the construction companies are saying to us that they want to build rooftop solar on top of these new buildings. So this is a sort of a second model for us. It's basically like construction company developer. And then the third one is what Ramos was just talking about, is the DPPA. Enel, who spoke previous to us, is the company that we're hopefully going to come to an agreement with on this program. And that's the biggest part. So the first program is only about 2% of our total electricity. The second one is probably about 10% if we did it. Basically, the construction companies have told us that that we don't have to purchase the electricity off of the rooftop. So we're waiting to find out what the results of the DPPA before we go forward with point number 2. But to answer the question that sort of Ramos was talking about there, is why do we want to do it? You know, the first one really is corporate responsibility. It's the correct thing to do. It is consistent with the corporate values, you know, established by our chairman. But he's a businessman, you know, so it's not something he was telling us to do, but it's something that he appreciates us coming to him and saying, we think we have a solution for a program that makes sense for us from a corporate responsibility perspective, and also from a financial perspective on it. The second biggest one is the renewable energy certificates. It's critical for Adidas, you know, to hit the UNFCCC information on 30% greenhouse gas emissions by 2030. Adidas wants to do that. They've committed to doing that. We are a major manufacturer for them, so we support those programs. And then, of course, the third one is the business plan. What's the risk and what's the reward of the strike price stability versus the wholesale fluctuations? This was a whole new world for us. As was mentioned previously, we just bought strictly off of the retail market, and this was, you know, simply a budget item, and we really didn't look at it from any other detail other than that. But these are the 3 programs that we're currently working on at HS Enterprise, and they're the reasons why. Next slide. So what are the challenges that we've been facing since March? The first one is the lack of internal competencies to drive this alone. As I mentioned, we don't have the internal expertise. You know, we have a guy in maintenance who could get me the information if I ask for what is our usage at any particular facility, and he can get us the bill. But as far as a major program like the DPPA that we're talking about here, we had no experience and we had nobody internal that had the expertise. It's been great to be able to, you know, act renewable with the intermediary role that they've just mentioned. Without them, you know, we wouldn't have been able to move off of first base. You know, the second is that we really needed to have an understanding of the sourcing strategy of our customer. That's Adidas. So Adidas is very good with us. They give us 3, 4, 5-year plans, so we know where we stand. We know that if we perform the way that we're supposed to perform, and we you know, give them an idea of where we're heading, you know, we have a good idea where the business plan is going to go. So we're confident with Adidas and ourselves in Vietnam, but then we also had to project that onto our businesses. Businesses evolve over time. We have a major facility in one location in Vietnam. We're slowly transferring that to a second location. That raised a lot of questions for me, you know, whether or not we were signing up for a location or for a corporation or what. But it was important. We're talking about an 18-year program. So we had to make sure that Adidas and HS were aligned on where we were going to be in 18 years from a perspective of Vietnam. And we also had to know our internal business. Where were we going to manufacture the various parts and components and footwear that Adidas is asking us to make? Estimating the cost trajectory of electricity in Vietnam, that's something we had no idea. Act Renewable, at the very first meeting, they gave us, I think it was about a 10-year, decades-long curve to show us what the prices have done. In the rooftop that I mentioned, the very first program that we've already established, we had a company that worked with us, and they gave a projection of what they thought it was going to be. We've done an internal projection, but again, it's something different. We never really looked at it from that perspective, you know, estimating the cost trajectory of electricity over an 18-year period in multiple locations inside of Vietnam. The other challenge we ran into was essentially securing legal representation for the term sheet negotiations and the contract for difference. We have our own company, a legal company that we deal with in Vietnam. When we brought this to them, you know, they took a look at it, they studied it for a week, and then basically at the end of the week, they called me up and they said, you know what, we don't have any expertise in this. We have no familiarity with this. We recommend that you find somebody else. So, you know, that was a bit of a problem because, you know, this is an 18-year arrangement. There's a lot of money associated with this. Again, actually, we contacted Act Renewable. They gave us the names of 3 different companies that we could contact inside of in Vietnam. We contacted one of them, a global company that had experience with these types of programs in both Europe and in the USA. And luckily, that company has agreed to represent us. But that was for, you know, a period of time that was a concern of mine. Who are we going to find as a legal representation for it? Also, understanding the nuances of the program. It seems like it's a little bit of a moving target sometimes. You know, the program was a rush. It was, you know, going to be approved by the Vietnamese government by a certain point in time. That time has drifted a little bit. It's been extended. As we get deeper and deeper into it, I've gone from knowing nothing about it to learning a little bit about it. I'm certainly not the expert that you guys are. But at the time, I didn't know about the FIT 2 versus a PPA. That was something we ran into early in the program. The DPPA charge is a concern, as was already mentioned, because it's a cost that we would have to bear that, as far as we know, we thought it might be fixed in the beginning of the program, but it's still not yet, as far as I know, fixed, and it could vary over the course of the contract. So that's you know, that's something we have to work on. Wholesale and retail prices, we didn't really know about wholesale prices. It's a benefit of this program that we're understanding now to be in it, that, you know, electricity above what we commit to, we can be buying in the wholesale prices, which is an added advantage for us. And then recently, I didn't realize, you know, I thought that all of our electricity came directly from the grid, EVN, but I'm finding out a couple of our facilities, about 3 of our 7 facilities, the electricity comes from the grid to an industrial zone, and we have contracts signed with the industrial zones. So we're in the point of discussing with them whether, you know, we could modify or change those contracts so that we could be working in this program at a much higher level. And then the last thing is actually briefing our internal senior management team. At HS, it's been an entrepreneurial and instinctual company for many, many years. It's been successful. As I showed you the graph from 2002 to 2019, it's grown quickly. But this is an entirely different area. Our vice chairman and our CFO are based in Seoul, Korea, and our CEO is based in Vietnam. None of them have experience with this. So trying to communicate to them exactly what the program is about, what the advantages of the program are, what the risk of the program are, has been you know, a little bit of a challenge because it's not like I'm an expert, so I want to make sure that the information that I'm communicating to them is correct on it. So that's the major challenges that we've been facing. You know, as far as ambition or the future, we want to continue to be a very strong partner to Adidas. We've had, you know, great success being their partner. We want to be at least as big as we are, or as a percent or bigger with them. And we would like to be known as a leader in the Adidas suppliers in the renewable energy field. So that's a major ambition. Secondly, I still myself have to create a 2020 to 2025 roadmap for reducing our carbon footprint. This is becoming more and more important, as was mentioned in previous presentations from a brand perspective. You know, it's something the brands communicate. Some brands, Allbirds as an example, they communicate what the carbon footprint is of each one of the shoes they make. This is inevitable, a direction that we need to be moving in. So far, the programs that I mentioned to you, the 3 programs on a couple slides previous, they were all from Vietnam. But we need to create programs for China. We need to create them for Indonesia, for Vietnam. And also, as I mentioned, we're going to be moving into India. So we need to create that roadmap for carbon footprint reduction for our HS enterprise. And then, you know, the immediate next step, we're in the, I don't know if we're in the beginning, middle, or close to the end. I think we're probably closer to the end than we are to the beginning. We want to complete the DPPA process successfully, so it works best for everybody involved on it. That's it, I think.
Great, thank you. Well, I think we have a few questions lined up, so I'm not going to spend too much time on the summary. I guess you can sort of all read it here, but generally it's about more corporate tailored opportunities, better options, and cooperation between the brand, and for all sake, more speed. That's really what we need. I think that was it for us. I don't know if there's any questions you'd like to ask. Cautious
yes,
of time here.
Mr. Rasmus? Yes. Yes, thank you very much for the very valuable sharing from the corporate perspective. Now, let's take a look at the audience questions. Okay. So, apologize, we can only choose three of them because time issue, because we have very few time limit. So, messages, maybe we can start from the question number 1. Under the current regulatory regime, how does FIT and CPPA work together for solar rooftop in Vietnam in terms of structure, legal contract arrangement?
Yeah, well,
Mr.
basically,
Rasmus,
yeah. Can you hear me?
Yeah, we can.
Okay, so basically, I think from a corporate perspective, what we have realized and what we have seen is that there is a cannibalism between the two programs. And especially because they have, originally they were not supposed to run simultaneously, but because the DPPA program has been slightly pushed out, they have kind of collided. And what we've seen there is that the local landowners or the local Vietnamese asset owners have been more tilted towards the FIT program because it gives them a long-term fixed price with the authorities rather than an opportunity to negotiate with an international brand. So what we have seen is that there is a cannibalism. So a lot of the projects was taken out of the market, and now we're basically seeing as a number of companies are not able to develop their projects to the end of the year with CFD, then a few projects are re-entering the DPPA market.
Okay, so the next question for Mr. Hugh, what are the major challenges or concerns for corporate buyers?
I think it was pretty much what I was saying. You know, the biggest one is internal expertise. We just simply don't have it. We need outside advice and guidance in order to make the right decisions and to go in the right direction. Business projections, both from our company and internally, we need to consider those. Legal assistance is something that I think has to be considered, because if it's something that's new, legal teams are not going to be familiar with that. And then you always need to make sure you have a good business case. As I mentioned, our chairman he supports this type of program, but he also supports making money. So we need to make sure that we marry up both of those programs.
Understood. So the last question is for both of you. What are the driving factors and steps in transitioning from manufacturing to a company that commit to renewable energy?
I don't know if you want to go first, Hugh.
Just going first, I mean, I showed you that OST, and I mentioned digital. A couple of years ago, 4 or 5 years ago, we had nobody in our company with any information or any ability in digital. Now we have a digital manufacturing department, a digital creation department, and Adidas recognizes us as a leader in both of those areas. I look at this similarly. Adidas is asking us to move in this direction. We are a manufacturing company. We always will be a manufacturing company, but we need to make the commitment to the renewable energy. That means we have to change the corporate culture, to make sure that it's part of what we do and how we consider our business. And additionally, we have to start hiring the resources to manage this in a responsible way in multiple locations over the next few years.
And I think from my side in general, what we're seeing, the manufacturings are transitioning simply because they do see the benefit of this. They see the business case, not necessarily on a one-to-one at the moment, but they do see that this is an opportunity for them to retain long-term agreements with companies. It is shifting to a point now where it is still a window of opportunity, but soon, I believe in a couple of years, if it will become the opposite, that if you don't do it, you're out. So I think that's the edge that we're balancing right now. And then, of course, with the reduction of prices on renewables and the increasing power prices that we expect to see in most markets around the world in the coming years due to increasing demand, then yeah, we'll probably still see a positive business case on renewables in the future, not only in the Western and yeah, Western part of Europe, sort of in the Western world, but also in the Eastern world going forward. So that's how we see it.
Okay, so now let's take a look at the Q&A box. So may you open the Q&A box, and may I choose a question from Ding Dong? How would you normally finance a project like the Hwaseung deal in Vietnam?
Is that a question to Hwaseung, or to, because how would you finance a project like the Hwaseung deal? I mean, from a corporate perspective, it is an OPEX. They're literally just paying a price for the power they purchase and the certificates that they receive in return. So from a Hwaseung perspective, there is no financing here. It's purely a question of how do you sign the deal. So how would the developer finance it? I think is probably more a question for Massimiliano than for Hwaseung, I would say.
Okay. So Mr. Hugh, if you want to add some comment?
So would Adidas be willing to provide guarantee or make longer contract with the supplier to match basically, we signed MOUs, memorandums of understanding with Adidas for certain periods of time, and it's based off of a checklist of criteria. Essentially, this would be one of them, but on a one-on-one basis, Adidas would not do that. But as I mentioned, you know, they say this is what we expect out of a good supplier, and if we can hit those targets in a multiple areas, we have MOUs for 5 to 10 year agreements at a time.
And I think I'd like to add to this that for at least for the conversation that's going on right now in Vietnam, Adidas does not need to sign any backing, financial backing of their suppliers, because the suppliers are has the credit ratings sufficiently themselves. So that's not required. Whether that's going to be the case in the future, I think that's a different story. But right now, at least what we're exploring at the moment, it is not necessary, as there is a parent company guarantee backing of the companies in Vietnam by the by the brands behind. Then there is one more question here. Says, what aspects of PPAs do you usually find the most challenging for corporates when deciding in terms of PPAs? Well, it's pretty simple. It's three things. It's the length of the contract, it's the price, and it's the exit opportunities. And I think what we are seeing in Europe, and I think even Enel can probably speak better to that than I can do, is that we're looking at something called micro PPAs or tier 2 PPAs, where the companies are basically paying a higher price, but they're not taking as high a risk because the risk is taken by an intermediate, which could be a utility. And then that reduces the potential contract length. Also, the price is of course higher because somebody else is taking that risk, but you have much better exit opportunities. So I think what developers needs to look at and needs to understand, as well as the corporates need to understand it from the developer side, is that this contract length, prices, and exit opportunities is really the deal breakers in here. At least that's what we are seeing generally.
Yes, I think it is all for your part. And now I would like to say thank you to all the presenters for Mr. Kajimura-san, Deputy Head of Power Business Division in SB Energy, and Ms. Milano, Head of Global Commercial Origination of Enel Green Power, and also Mr. Rasmus, Managing Director of Renewables, and Mr. Hugh, Strategic Advisor of Hwaseung Group. We appreciate your kind sharing today. And at last, I would like to remind you of the conference 100% Renewable Summit 2020 on the November in Manila of the Philippines, and the Solar Wind and Virtual 2020 on August 11 at your desk. I think this is all for today's webinar, and thanks again for staying with us, and see you next time.